This is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
South Sudan will have to wait longer for a unity government as rival parties extend pre-transitional period for 6 more months. Concerns of insecurity in the Sahel despite efforts to bolster the fight against Islamists in the region. And Prime Minister of Libya's Government of National Accord expresses willingness to hold dialogue in an exclusive interview with CGTN. Hello and welcome to Africa Live on CGTN with me, Beatrice Marshall, in Nairobi. We'll bring you the details on those stories in just a moment, but first, Ramanyang with the day's business headlines. Rama.
Thank you very much, Beatrice. Here's what's coming up in the course of the hour. Nigeria says 132 companies have put in bids for oil swap contracts with the country. And Kenya's largest telecoms operator announces full-year earnings of over $880 million. We'll be breaking down those numbers and plenty more in the course of the hour. For now, though, let's start with the latest in current affairs with Beatrice.
Rama, thank you. And let's start in South Sudan, where the country will not have a transitional government of unity on the 12th of May as anticipated. This follows a decision made by the warring factions at a two-day meeting in Ethiopia to extend the current pre-transitional period for 6 more months. CGTN's Coletta Wanjohi tells us more.
South Sudan will need to wait another 6 months before a unity government is formed after opposition forces proposed an extension to the plan. They argued that security arrangements as set out in the peace agreement were not yet in place and the country would not be prepared in time for the 11th May deadline. So far, there has not been a disarmament exercise and military forces on the ground are still very divided. And so there will be a further delay to the peace agreement. The Intergovernmental Authority for Development, IGAD, which has been the mediator, is urging the parties to stick to their word because the return of peace cannot wait.
Most importantly, and as a collective, we need to steadfast in the pursuit to restore sustainable peace and stability in South Sudan. This is why the convening of this roundtable discussion of the leaders of the parties is timely and very significant.
This 6-month extension is likely to cause further concerns, especially with the oncoming rainy season, as this will cause difficulties for military forces to move to their designated barracks, which could then slow down the proposed military cantonment. Coletta Wanjohi, CGTN, Addis Ababa, Ethiopia.
Well, let's now cross over to Coletta Wanjohi. She's standing by in Addis Ababa. Coletta, you have been attending the talks there in Addis Ababa. Can you give us an update on this and what led to this decision to extend the pre-transitional period?
Well, Beatrice, as we are speaking now, the meeting is still going on, and what is happening now is the warring factions, the signatories to the South Sudan peace agreement, are now deciding on the wording of the resolution that they have made after the 2 days. Part of the things they have said is that they are not ready in terms of security arrangements and aspects that will assist them to have a permanent ceasefire, and this means unification of troops, cantonment of military forces, as well as ensuring that there is disarmament in all military forces. So majorly because of the security situation, they are saying that they need more time. The government had opposed and said that they were ready to begin the transitional government as of 12th of May, but the opposition and other signatories pushed and said they needed more time. And so they reached a compromise and the government accepted and said, then let there be 6 more months for a pre-transitional period.
Coletta, the opposition had proposed the 6 months extension, though, and they were claiming unpreparedness. So what guarantees are there that come 6 months later, the parties will be ready for the unity government?
There is no guarantee, Beatrice, because we have seen this happening over and over again. If you remember, the peace talks and all these agreements, seeking agreements began around 2013, and there have been several peace agreements signed by the South Sudan factions. But in this case, there is no guarantee that within 6 months, all the security forces will be unified to begin with. Because remember, the Joint Monitoring and Evaluation Committee that has been monitoring the peace process has said that up to date, within the 8 months that was given for the pre-transitional period, there has been not been even one cantonment center bolster that was put up. So what this some of the resolutions that are being discussed now, some of the parties are saying that even if we extend for 1 more year, there are things that will not be done within this short time. So even within 6 months, there is no surety that everything will be done. It will be a process, and that's why the government has been saying, let's just begin the transitional government of national unity and work on other issues. So there is no guarantee.
Now, Coletta, the latest peace deal was largely pushed by long-time Sudanese President Omar al-Bashir. And we're asking, with his ouster, who will take over this task or has the influence to get the South Sudanese to implement the accord?
Beatrice, I think the beauty or the value to the whole peace accord is the fact that it was brokered by a regional body, which is the Intergovernmental Authority for Development. South Sudan or Khartoum just took over to try and assist the regional body. But even without President Omar al-Bashir at the forefront, still the peace process continues because there is a structure to which the peace process and implementation should follow. And that falls under the regional body, IGAD. So with or without President Omar al-Bashir, there is still a roadmap that the IGAD countries will follow. And regardless of who becomes the president or the leader in Sudan or any other country in the IGAD region, the peace process will still follow the roadmap that was designed.
All right, Coletta Wanjohi for us there in Addis Ababa following the South Sudanese unity talks. Let's now go to Mali, where armed men have killed 18 civilians in 2 ambushes. Authorities say the incidents took place near the village of Tiguila in the restive central region. The deadly series of events were unleashed when a Malian army vehicle transporting rations exploded near the village. 12 civilians were killed by militia on Wednesday as they went towards the blast. When they did not return, 6 members of their community set out to look for them on Thursday, only to be killed by the same group. Mali has been embroiled in conflict since the Islamist militias seized the north of the country in 2012. A peace agreement signed in 2015 by the Bamako government and armed groups has failed to restore stability. Now, the attack came as German Chancellor Angela Merkel wrapped up her 3-nation tour of Africa, which saw her visit Burkina Faso, Mali and Niger. Angela Merkel promised millions of dollars in aid to fight terrorism in the region and support economic development. She also held discussions with leaders of the countries which make the G5 Sahel grouping formed to tackle rising insecurity. The Islamic extremism is on the rise in the Sahel, particularly in Burkina Faso and Mali. Niger has made efforts in curbing migration, but the country's president Mamadou Issoufou says they need more help in providing support for thousands of vulnerable people now living in camps on its territory.
We have to offer people other opportunities, other activities including agriculture, tourism and craft. We have been working on projects in these areas, and some of those projects are being funded, including by Germany.
If we want to fight traffickers and smugglers, we have to create jobs for the people of Niger. We have taken initial measures. Some German projects have been undertaken, but I totally understand that it is necessary to do more, because we have to offer opportunities to citizens in this region.
For more on this, let's now cross over to Deji Badmus. He's in Lagos for us. Deji, 18 civilians killed in Mali. This coming barely a few hours after discussions on security in the Sahel took place. Millions of dollars have been pledged by Germany. So what would be the likely impact of the support by Germany?
Well, the impact of that support by Germany would no doubt be significant. But how significant? I'm talking about the quantum of the significance now is what we cannot tell. Mrs. Merkel has, of course, pledged 60 million euros to the G5 Sahel force. That is what is going to the G5 Sahel force. Now, the G5 Sahel force actually needs that money. The reason why its operation has been slowed down all this while, since 2014 when it was set up, has basically been because of funds. Funding has not come as everyone had expected. Sometime last year, donors actually pledged $2.3 billion, but those monies did not come as people expect. So now you have 60 million euros being pledged by the German government. The hope is that that pledge will be redeemed because that money will make some difference on the ground. At least it would help to get the forces going and to be able to carry out more operations, if you like. But the fact is that, look, beyond what Mrs. Merkel has done, the world needs to do more. I mean, those who have pledged, the donors who made the pledge last year, they need to do more. The European Union needs to do more to ensure that the Sahel does not become uncontrollable, if you like, because it's very important that the Sahel is controlled, especially to control migration, because that's, of course, is a migratory route for irregular migrants now. And then it's also, it's become like a den now for Islamist militants who are leaving from Libya, and now that ISIS has been displaced in Iraq and Syria, they are all beginning to find their way to the Sahel region. So it's very important that everyone acts and acts very fast.
Right. The G5 Sahel force, as you mentioned, there needs money. Insecurity in the region has been ongoing for a while now. In fact, in just the last 6 months, terror attacks in Mali, Burkina Faso and Niger have killed nearly 5,000 people in 1,200 incidents. Is it fair to say that the international community has ignored the issue or not understood its importance?
What I'd rather say is that the international community probably don't understand the magnitude of the problem in that region, or if it does, it's just not doing enough to address the situation. I mean, several meetings have been held. There have been several fora to address the challenge in the Sahel region. But unfortunately, the international community has not been forthcoming. It's not been able to walk the talk. We've had a series of talk shops, but walking the talk has been the greatest challenge. And the fact is that if we continue to do the talking and talking and talking, and we don't see any action, then things would only get worse. We're talking about a region that is very poor. We're talking about a region where 75% of the population are youth. They do not have jobs, income, there's no income. So it's a no-brainer that if something is not done, the wave of migration we are going to see in that region would be nothing compared to, I mean, what we're going to have in the future will be, what we have now will be nothing compared to what we're going to have in the future. And then it only means Islamist militants who are now establishing their bases around the region will get, they'll get stronger. And of course, they'll have a willing army of recruits from the youths now who would definitely want to join them. So it's, I just think the international community needs to do more. At the moment, it's not doing enough at all.
All right, Deji Badmus joining us there from Lagos on that story of insecurity in the region. Thank you. Well, Nigerian security forces are combing a part of Katsina state in the northwest in search of a kidnapped relative of President Muhammadu Buhari. Now, gunmen abducted Musa Umar, an in-law to the president and a district head, late on Wednesday evening. CGTN's Kelechi Emekalam has more.
The kidnap happened in President Muhammadu Buhari's country home, Daura, in Katsina State. Musa is a prominent man there. He's a retired customs official married to a niece of President Buhari. His daughter is married to the president's ADC. 4 gunmen invaded Musa's home at about 7 p.m. local time on Wednesday. They shot sporadically into the air before the kidnap, and the gunmen shot at locals who attempted to rescue him. His kidnappers have not contacted his family or authorities, but kidnapping for ransom has been on the rise across Nigeria. Nigeria's security forces, including the Air Force, have been combing the area, especially the border area with Niger, but with little success. The police say the total number of kidnap cases in the past months is more than 1,000. In most cases, kidnappers go after high-value targets like foreign nationals and prominent locals. Nigeria's security forces have announced several security beef-up, but kidnappers continue to strike at will and claim millions in ransom. Kelechi Emekalam, CGTN Abuja, Nigeria.
Now, as fighting rages on in the Libyan capital, Tripoli, Libya's Prime Minister of the UN-backed government in Tripoli has expressed willingness to hold dialogue, however, with conditions. In an exclusive interview with CGTN, Sarraj says he will only allow peace talks to resume if the Libyan National Army, loyal to Khalifa Haftar, will stop their current offensive.
The East-based LNA led by Khalifa Haftar has been leading a military campaign since early April to take over Tripoli. The leader of the UN-backed government sitting in Tripoli says LNA attacks are undermining the political process in Libya.
There are a lot of indicators that show the international community and the Security Council's members that what is happening in Tripoli is not as claimed fighting terrorism and militias. Before the ongoing Tripoli war, we are all waiting for the elections and talking about it everywhere. The Tripoli fighting, bombing and destruction have been causing serious results and bad repercussions on the humanitarian, security and political levels.
So far, more than 300 people have been killed since clashes erupted in and around Tripoli. More than 40,000 people have also been left homeless, with thousands others believed trapped in the city's southern outskirts. The government of National Accord of Libya sees a ceasefire as the solution to the unrest.
The LNA forces should end their operations and return to their place. Hence, talks about how to resume the political process might start. These fierce attacks have inflicted serious injuries on civilians, damaged infrastructure, schools, bookshops, bombed ambulances, residential neighborhoods and airports.
The international community has condemned the ongoing violence, but Sarraj says this is not enough.
We expected a more resolute position from the international community and the Security Council by calling those who are involved in this attack with their true names. This is, like what Ghassan Salama, the United Nations representative to Libya, said, a coup against legitimacy and an attempt to seize power.
Sarraj maintains that his government is not incapacitated as Haftar has made it look like. He says his government has made progress in economy, security and infrastructure development.
China was one of those countries, so we sent a committee there as a number of Chinese firms were wishing to return and resume their projects that value billions of dollars. Unfortunately, the security situation terrifies many foreign parties as they fear putting their staff at a risky situation in an unsafe area. The situation was better before Haftar's forces' assault on Tripoli. There have been many promises from countries and companies that were ready to return to the safest zones in particular. The attack took us back to square one.
Sarraj now says he's ready for peace talks, but only if the LNA forces will halt the Libya offensive. Chamgono, CGTN.
You're watching Africa Live. Still ahead on the program. The World Health Organization says the death toll from Ebola in the DRC is nearing 1,000. And the World Bank increases emergency support for 3 southern African countries affected by Cyclone Idai.
Data out of the country. The country's foreign currency reserves.
With a dedicated and diverse team of anchors, CGTN now brings Africa to the palm of your hand.
I'm Penina Karibe in the heart of Nairobi, which is bustling.
From everyday heroes to the continent's most powerful figures, we bring their voices to you.
We haven't changed. And this is something most of us are very excited about.
We bring you news that's changing perspectives.
I'm Uche Okoronkwo reporting from Nairobi City Center.
News that brings Africa to the world. CGTN. See the difference. Africa Live. Find your voice.
Let's go to South Africa, where residents of Bacon Park, a housing project, are complaining about poor living conditions. CGTN's Ashtatal looks at how the residents' growing frustrations might reflect on their choices during the country's May 8th general election.
Nani Molloy starts off the day making breakfast for her granddaughter. She's one of the residents of Bacon Park, an ANC project aimed at addressing racial disparities in housing and land ownership. Molloy was excited when she first got the keys to her new house. But happiness turned into disappointment when she found no running water.
As you can see, I just live in this house, but these houses are leaking. We don't have running water, there are no taps inside the houses, we can't flush the toilet, and we have to use buckets for sanitation.
This housing project cost the South African government an estimated $10 million.
No one has come to check how we are coping with the disaster that we are dealing with. And the most heartbreaking part is that we don't even have electricity.
For Molloy and her neighbors, the poor living conditions will have a bearing on whether they'll participate in the upcoming elections.
When it comes to elections, they come and tell us everything and anything so that we can vote for them. But they do nothing for us. They just want us to elevate them.
I doubt that I will vote because nothing is fine here. We are always voting, but the government doesn't want to make us happy.
South Africans will go to the polls on May 8th. Issues like proper housing and provisions of other social amenities will be critical issues for many voters. Astatal, CGTN.
The number of Ebola cases in the Democratic Republic of Congo is rising fast. The latest figures from the World Health Organization bring the total confirmed cases to 1,400, including over 900 deaths, most of which are women and children. The World Health Organization is planning to introduce an unlicensed new Ebola vaccine, but response is stalled and hindered by acts of violence against health workers. CGTN's Tulisha Balala has more.
This outbreak started in the DRC in August, just a week after authorities declared the end of Ebola in the west of the country. That outbreak killed 33 people. This one has killed at least 900.
As you know, the number of cases in especially Butembo and Katwa is increasing, more than 20 per day. This is very dangerous and we're really, really worried, and I know you're worried too.
The number of Ebola cases in the Democratic Republic of Congo is rising faster, reaching a high of 27 confirmed cases in one day. That's according to the country's health ministry. The World Health Organization plans to introduce an unlicensed new Ebola vaccine made by Johnson & Johnson, in addition to a Merck vaccine already being used. But insecurity in the country continues to hamper response efforts. More than 60,000 people in the DRC's Beni region in North Kivu province have left their homes since the latest wave of armed attacks began on March 30. Some people are forced to cross the border into Uganda illegally, avoiding official immigration procedures and registration as refugees. They now too risk the virus spreading into the neighboring East African nation. Aid agencies are warning Congolese and Ugandan authorities of a potential humanitarian crisis. Uganda says it's beefing up surveillance teams and authorities along the border with the DRC. Tuli Shabalala, CGTN.
The World Bank has increased emergency support for the 3 southern African countries affected by Cyclone Idai to $700 million. More than 1,000 people were killed across Mozambique, Zimbabwe and Malawi in March. The new World Bank President David Malpass, however, says the damage caused by Cyclone Kenneth is still being assessed. The bank says it is activating the International Development Assistance Association's crisis response window to provide up to $545 million in total for the three countries. Meanwhile, in Mozambique, nearly 200,000 people are in need of health assistance or are at risk of contracting diseases. This follows two cyclones hitting the country in a 5-week period. Mozambique was reeling from the aftermath of Cyclone Idai when Cyclone Kenneth hit the northern parts of the country. The World Health Organization stressed on the need for rapid action to manage the risk of cholera. Parts of the country remain inaccessible in the aftermath of both cyclones.
Kenneth was the second Category 3 cyclone to hit the country within 5 weeks. Due to the lack of accessibility, the full extent of the damage to the health system is not known. At least 17 health facilities have been damaged, but this number is expected to rise. WHO is working with the Ministry of Health to carry out evaluations, and they're also working with UNICEF and have sent tents, water purification units, and other supplies.
As the world comes to terms with Cyclone Idai and Kenneth, which have hit various African countries, Cyclone Fani, a Category 5 storm, has slammed into India's eastern coast, gusting up wind speeds of up to 200 kilometers per hour. It hit the coastal state of Odisha Friday morning. At least 3 people have died and over 1 million evacuated. The Indian Air Force, the Army and the Coast Guard have been put on high alert. Earlier, our correspondent Ravinda Bawa in New Delhi updated us on rescue efforts and the cyclone's expected path.
These are the kind of property damages that are visible right now in the visuals, but definitely the Navy will further assess by an aerial survey after it slows down a little to check and to assess the major loss that has happened in both the states of Odisha and West Bengal. And in the meantime, of course, Navy, Air Force, both deployed, and the National Disaster Response Force is also deployed with 55 teams are there on the ground to ensure that if there is any requirement, they will step in. Well, as we've heard, it's going to move from here to West Bengal. Already from West Bengal, the kind of reports that are coming in the local media are that it's already become clouded, it's already started raining. The city of Calcutta is already facing congestion and is flooded. So the kind of rain that is coming in is like an harbinger of what's going to follow later tonight, because it is being predicted that after midnight today, the cyclone will enter West Bengal, probably in the wee hours of the morning as well. And from West Bengal, it will further move to Bangladesh by tomorrow evening. That's 4th May. And that is, and you know, the speed from the time it had the landfall in Odisha, it has slowed down. It was 200 to 210 in the morning. Now it's around 150, 170. And probably by the time it reaches Bangladesh, it'll be a less intensive cyclone. But definitely people have been asked to stay indoors. All teams are on the ground to ensure that when help is needed, they will be there.
Sri Lankan authorities say Islamist extremists are believed to be planning attacks in Colombo, as several suspects in the Easter Day bombings remain at large. Police say more officers and river vessels will be deployed in the capital to boost security and search operations. The country's Catholic Church called off plans to resume Sunday services following information of a specific threat against 2 locations outside Colombo. Catholic schools will be closed until further notice, while public schools will reopen on Monday under tight security. Venezuelan opposition leader Juan Guaido has called for peaceful demonstrations at army bases. This comes after a failed military uprising on Tuesday to oust President Nicolas Maduro. Maduro has also called on the armed forces to oppose any coup plotter, as the leader refuses to step down amid ongoing protests and international pressure, especially from the United States. And here's a quick look at the headlines this hour. South Sudan will not have a transitional government of unity on May the 12th that was anticipated. This follows a decision by the warring factions meeting in Ethiopia for 2 days to extend the current pre-transitional period for more than 6 months. The opposition in South Sudan had proposed the 6 months extension, citing unpreparedness in the security arrangements agreed to in their peace agreement. In Mali, armed men have killed 18 civilians in 2 ambushes. Authorities say the incidents took place near the village of Tiguila in the restive central region. The deadly series of events were unleashed when a Malian army vehicle transporting rations exploded near the village. 12 civilians were killed by militia on Wednesday as they went towards the blast. When they did not return, 6 members of their community set out to look for them Thursday, only to be killed by the same group. And as fighting rages in the Libyan capital Tripoli, Libya's Prime Minister of the UN-backed government in Tripoli has expressed willingness to hold dialogue, however, with conditions. In an exclusive interview with CGTN, Sarraj said he will only allow peace talks to resume if the Libyan National Army loyal to Khalifa Haftar will stop their current offensive. And the number of Ebola cases in the Democratic Republic of Congo is rising fast. The latest figures from the World Health Organization brings the total confirmed cases to 1,400, including over 900 deaths, most of which are women and children. The World Health Organization is planning to introduce an unlicensed new Ebola vaccine, but response is stalled and hindered by acts of violence against health workers. And that's a look at your headlines. Well, let's now go to Ram Manyang for a look at the day's business news. Rama.
Thank you very much, Beatrice. Here's what's coming up in business. Nigeria says 132 companies have put in bids for oil swap contracts with the country. And Kenya's biggest telecoms operator announces full-year earnings of over $880 million.
Africa is the nexus of enterprise, and global business will tell you why it matters.
From the mega investment projects to multi-billion-dollar mergers and acquisitions.
Africa today collects, just in terms of revenues from taxes alone, $545 billion a year. If you take 10% of that and you devote it to the energy sector, problem solved.
All this on Global Business, weekdays at this time on CGTN.
Business in Africa is at the crossroads, where opportunity meets innovation, where profitable new markets collide with global trends. From the sound of an African bell on a stock market's floor, to the shout of the trader in a bustling free market. It's colorful, vibrant, and exotic. CGTN stands at the gateway to Europe, Africa, and the Middle East. From Morocco to South Africa, we talk to the deal makers and actors who fuel its engines of growth. Only on CGTN.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
Welcome back. The Nigerian State Oil Company says 132 companies have bid for oil swaps with the country. Now, the tender for the one-year contracts, which are more formally known as direct sale, direct purchase contracts, was issued in March. NNPC extended the 2018 contracts all the way through to June this year. Nigeria is almost entirely reliant on imported fuel due to years of neglect at its own refineries. It's leaned heavily on these swap agreements to get fuel, particularly gasoline, as other would-be importers struggle to make money due to price caps. Now, since the scheme was introduced in 2016, replacing another program that paid subsidies to importers, the authorities say it has saved the nation about $2.2 billion while supplying some 90% of import requirements. Over in East Africa, Kenya's biggest telecoms operator, Safaricom, has reported a 15% jump in net profits for the year ending in March to about $626 million. Voice revenue was relatively flat, going up by just 0.3%. M-Pesa, however, was the star. Mobile money revenue is up 19%, making the largest contributors to the company's revenue. Revenue from the data business growing at a much slower pace, 6.4% in the 2019 fiscal year, down from 24% in the previous fiscal year. year. Safaricom is partly owned by South Africa's Vodacom and Britain's Vodafone. It's the most profitable company in East Africa. It also expects its earnings before interest and taxation to rise to anywhere between $921 to $960 million in the 2020 fiscal year. Now, speaking of telcos, South Africa's MTN Group has appointed the former Deputy Finance Minister, Mcebisi Jonas, as chairman-designate. It's part of a board shake-up following a series of regulatory issues that have cost the company more than $1 billion around the continent. MTN has expanded into more than 20 other frontier markets. It's faced a number of disputes in its biggest market, Nigeria. Last year, it was about dividend repatriation, tax payments. That last one is still unresolved, and unregistered SIM cards. Now, in addition to Jonas, MTN has also appointed quite a few other heavyweights as well. The former governor of the Central Bank of Nigeria, Lamido Sanusi, and Vincent Rag, a Kenyan national who worked for the International Finance Corporation for all of 24 years in a number of senior positions. The South African health and wellness group, Ascendis Health, has announced that it will sell businesses within its biosciences division for all of $33 million. It's part of a strategic review to improve cash generation, boost profits, and the company will be selling the Effecto, Maltons and Africa businesses to a consortium that's made up of RMB Ventures and Nedbank's private equity arm. Ascendis shares jumped by nearly 8% after the announcement became public. They closed 1.58% higher at about 31 Rand cents. Now, the remaining businesses in the bioscience division may be considered for divestment in the short to medium term in order to accelerate growth. Onto the IMF now. It's forecasting a marginal rise at best in growth rates, GDP growth rates for sub-Saharan Africa. The current figure is about 3.5%, but it's expecting an average of 4% for 2019. But the fund is also warning that this growth rate is not enough. It's simply not keeping pace with current job creation requirements across the region. With the latest, here's CGTN's Kelechi Emekalam.
Officials from the IMF releasing economic growth outlooks for the sub-Saharan region in Nigeria's capital, Abuja, only weeks after it held its spring meeting in the US. The bank is forecasting faster growth rates in African economies less dependent on natural resources. And there are only 21 countries out of 45 that fit in that bracket. The IMF expects growth in those countries to top 5% above the region's average of 4%, while resource-dependent countries like Nigeria and South Africa are expected to record slower growth rates as commodity prices plummet in global markets.
One challenge with this, of course, is that at 4% for the region as a whole again, the growth rate is not high enough to create the millions and millions of jobs that need to be created in the coming years.
Nigeria and South Africa account for 2/3 of the region's total population. The IMF is urging governments in both countries to remove policies holding back productivity. It's also recommending increased public investment, improved debt management, and improvement in revenue mobilization, plus enhancing exchange rates flexibility.
7 out of 45 countries in sub-Saharan Africa are in debt distress, needing some kind of direct efforts to address the very high levels of debt. 6 of these countries are very fragile countries. These are Republic of Congo, Eritrea, the Gambia, Sao Tome and Principe, South Sudan, and Zimbabwe. And 2 out of these 7 are oil exporters, Republic of Congo and South Sudan.
At the current growth rate, the IMF says the sub-Saharan region can only generate about 12 million jobs annually. That's far less than the number of new entrants in the job market, estimated at 20 million per year. For the region to keep pace with job demands, sub-Saharan Africa must attain an average 6% economic growth rate by 2030. Kelechi Emekalam, CGTN, Abuja, Nigeria.
From Nigeria, let's move on to South Africa, specifically the city of Cape Town. It's been hosting what is being billed as Africa's premier Deco and Design Expo. Exhibitors are showcasing the finest and latest in lifestyle trends. Take a closer look.
This year, African culture and color was the driving inspiration behind one of the most widely anticipated Decor events on the continent. Decorex Cape Town 2019 was held under the theme Designing for Africa Feels Like Home. Many visitors were delighted by new ways to bring out the best in their homes with art, furniture, rugs and lighting.
I love coming to Decorex to come and see the whole idea, new ideas and what's new on the market. So I love coming here every year.
Miles Adams, one of the exhibitors at Decorex, brought the honeycomb board to the expo, recyclable and sturdy for crating.
I think the whole sustainable solutions is becoming more popular, and what we found a gap in the market was it started with crating. Crating ultimately was done mostly in timber, so we've had to bring in an alternative where you could reuse the crate, but at the same time it needs to be strong, and then once it's used it can be then recycled again.
Adams borrowed the concept from bees. The bee's honeycomb structure is very strong and once laminated gives the product core strength. There are little cells inside the bigger structure and those cells keep the honeycomb board rigid. Sustainable lifestyle options were a very important attraction for visitors at Decorex this year. Alexandria Majala for CGTN.
South Africa is home to the largest tourism economy on the continent. New data from the World Travel and Tourism Council indicated the industry contributed to about 1.5 million jobs last year, generating roughly $30 billion in spending in the country's economy. That figure accounts for roughly 8.6% of all economic activity in South Africa. Now, despite challenges regarding visas, ease of access for key source markets, security and the recent drought, of course, that ravaged Cape Town, the sector still continues to thrive. Rene Delcam has the details.
During the apartheid years, overseas arrivals in South Africa were largely made up of people visiting family members in the country. But there's been steady growth in the sector over the past 25 years.
Since 1994, we've seen quite astronomical growth in tourism arrivals in South Africa, both from the African continent and from overseas markets. What we've seen in the last few years is very impressive growth from both North America and South America, and of course India and China surfacing as potentially enormous source markets for South African tourism.
About 10 million international tourists visit South African shores every year. The government has set itself a target of doubling this figure by the year 2030, but admits it's already falling short of its target. The South African tourism sector has been adversely affected by negative factors such as stringent visa requirements, which were introduced in 2015 and has since been relaxed, a notoriously high crime rate, and devastating drought conditions in the tourist mecca of Cape Town in 2018.
People were worried that Cape Town might run out of water. It wasn't going to happen, but of course many people changed their travel plans, and the consequence was that we had negative growth in international tourist arrivals in Cape Town. Similarly, perceptions of crime by any global standards for tourists and the kinds of things they do, South Africa is a safe place. Nonetheless, perceptions matter, and they have dampened tourist arrivals in our country.
South African tourism employs over 600,000 people, with a value chain of around 1.5 million people. And the government has identified it as a sector with huge potential.
Our forecast ahead is a very positive forecast, but right now, if we have to be honest, we're a bit flat right now. We're not where we thought we would have been a couple of years ago. But at the same time, we're aware of the factors, addressing the factors, and therefore we anticipate really good future growth.
And it's hoped that this growth will translate into more much-needed jobs in South Africa.
We just simply have a very beautiful, exquisitely beautiful country with a diversity of offerings. So from day one, I knew that this is something that can be sold.
Rene Delcam, CGTN, Cape Town, South Africa.
Right then, wrapping up the tourism theme. Last year, the number of Chinese visitors to Dubai was over 850,000. China, as we speak, is now the fourth largest source of tourists for the Emirates. CGTN's Jacob Greaves now reports Dubai is only stepping up its efforts to attract a lot more visitors from China.
From skyscrapers to luxury islands, Dubai has long promoted itself as a global tourism hub. But with the ambitious target of 20 million visitors by 2020, it needs burgeoning markets. And one appears to be China, with a 12% increase last year.
The Chinese tourism market, as I mentioned earlier, is growing at about 28%. We think within the next few years, UAE should be receiving anywhere between 1.7 to 2.1 million visitors from China. So as a result of that tourism, we think the whole UAE tourism industry is going to get a huge boost from the Chinese tourist market.
Here at the annual Arabian Tourism Market, the event has hosted its first Arab-China summit, with how to court Chinese visitors a key talking point.
One major reason is spending power. According to the latest figures from the UN's World Tourism Organization, in 2017, Chinese visitors were the top global spenders. That's by over $100 billion more than their closest rivals, American citizens. And there's already been a number of recent attempts to make Dubai a more attractive destination. Chinese travellers can now visit the UAE visa-free. Last year, Dubai established its first 24-hour Chinese language radio station. And from major malls to the world's tallest building, 2019 has seen a host of tourist hotspots launch Chinese mobile payment platforms such as WeChat Pay.
Any destination or the retailers or incoming tour operators want to attract the Chinese, make it easier for them to pay. Because comparing, if one says, sorry, we don't take Alipay, and the other says, yes, we take mobile pay, then the one who takes mobile pay definitely get the business. Because, you know, that's just simple, because they don't have to transfer the money, exchange. There's still certain restriction on foreign exchange, but there's no restriction on spending local money on their phone or whatever mobile, and the bank takes care of the transaction to the retailers.
In numbers, Chinese visitors still rank below the likes of India, Saudi Arabia and Britain. But encouraging more Chinese visitors is important as the Emirate gears up to host Expo 2020. And amid signs overall tourism might be slowing. Government statistics claim overnight visitors increased by around 1% last year, hitting 15.9 million. That's compared to over 6% growth in 2017. With the clock ticking on Dubai's 2020 goals, more efforts to reel in China's jet setters are likely on the horizon. Jacob Greaves, CGTN in Dubai.
I'll be there for the time being. I'll be back at the top of the hour though. We'll be looking at what companies did vie for those oil swap contracts in Nigeria. It's Africa's single largest crude oil producer, but why on earth is it importing refined fuel? Some answers coming your way at 1800 GMT, live from Lagos on Global Business. See you then. For now though, back to Beatrice.
Rama, thank you. And we still have more news for you here on the program. Here's what's ahead. Nigeria slum youth take on music scene after a talent show success.
The greatest journeys, the greatest sights, the greatest adventures.
Here in Panater, this weir allows the locals to walk on water.
We're far more than just TV news. We're your passport to the wonders of Africa.
To bring you stories of struggle, survival and hope.
So let's explore. CGTN. See the difference.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
Two young artists who grew up in a shanty town are Nigeria's latest singing sensations. After being discovered on a local talent show, they're working to establish their music careers. Their success has even inspired the launch of a record label that taps into emerging talent from disadvantaged communities. CGTN's Brian Toussaint finds out.
Dixon Idai and James Namani are on a radio show in Lagos to promote their music. Both are from central Nigeria's Benue state. After being discovered on a local talent show, they are the country's newest singing sensations.
I feel very happy. It feels like a dream come true. Thank God for everything. My music is being heard almost every radio station in Nigeria, and I'm very happy.
17-year-old Idai says it took years for him to get noticed, but he never gave up. He's recently released a single that's been playing on the airwaves. 13-year-old Namani finds any opportunity he can to record songs. He hopes to secure a better future for his mother, siblings, and grandmother.
I've always loved music. I started music at the age of 10. I used my mommy's spoon. I play instrumentals and I rap to it. Sometimes I sing to it. And I always go for competition at the age of 10, 11, 12 and 13. But I got my breakthrough at the age of 14.
The two artists aren't just inspiring other musicians struggling to make a break. They are also inspiring music producers.
Go to school on Monday. Go to the studio on Friday.
The motivation is the talent that I saw, when I went to direct Otubo Got Talent. I saw that these two kids were so talented and I couldn't pass on them. So I decided because of them to launch a record label to help the less privileged and those in the community, in the society, in Nigeria and all the rest of Africa.
My guys, couldn't you want to be getting money for bank on my pocket?
Like the Nollywood film industry, music is big business in Nigeria. Afrobeat artists are now selling out concerts not only across Africa, but the US and UK too. Brian Toussaint, CGTN.
And coming up in your sports news. Guinea's Naby Keita likely to miss the 2019 Africa Cup of Nations due to groin injury.
Africa, where champions are made, records are broken, legends are born. We're there for every goal, for every knockout, for every step of the way. Match Point, only on CGTN.